Ever wondered how Indigenous tribes survived without refrigerators, canned goods, or corner stores? When your next meal depends entirely on what nature provides, letting food spoil isn't an option. From the scorching Amazon to the frozen Arctic, tribes developed ingenious preservation methods that modern food scientists are still learning from today. For Indigenous tribes across the globe, food preservation wasn't just a convenient way to store leftovers. It was the difference between feast and famine, survival and starvation. Unlike our modern world, where a quick trip to the store solves any food shortage, tribal communities had to carefully plan their food supply around nature's sometimes unpredictable cycles. Have you ever considered how differently people approach food when their lives literally depend on preserving every scrap? The methods these tribes developed weren't random. They evolved precisely to match their unique environments. Desert-dwelling Hopi perfected dry storage techniques for corn and beans, while Pacific Northwest tribes like the Tlingit created elaborate smoking methods for their salmon harvests. Arctic Inuit developed ways to preserve meat in permafrost and animal fat, creating provisions that could last through months of darkness and bitter cold. Each preservation technique was a direct response to local challenges, resources, and weather patterns. What's fascinating is how this critical knowledge traveled through time. Without written recipes or YouTube tutorials, tribal elders taught younger generations through direct participation. A Lakota child might learn pemmican making by watching her grandmother's precise movements, trying the technique herself, and receiving gentle corrections until her hands understood what words alone couldn't fully explain. Can you imagine the pressure of getting it exactly right when one preservation mistake could mean hunger for the entire community? These preservation methods weren't one size fits all. They had different timelines and purposes. Short-term techniques kept food edible for days or weeks, allowing hunters to bring meat back to camp without spoilage. Long-term preservation required more elaborate methods, creating food stores that would sustain the tribe through winter, drought, or migration periods. The knowledge of proper food preservation wasn't just practical, it was sacred. Many tribes incorporated preservation activities into ceremonial life, honoring the animals and plants that sustained them. Among the Cherokee, the first harvested corn became part of the green corn ceremony, with specific preservation methods tied to giving thanks. In numerous tribes, preservation knowledge marked the wisdom of elders, earning them respect and authority within the community. While every tribe faced unique challenges in keeping food fresh, they all shared one powerful ally in their preservation arsenal: the sun, nature's original dehydrator. The sun, nature's most accessible tool, transformed perishable foods into durable provisions across every inhabited continent. For thousands of years before electric dehydrators lined kitchen countertops, Indigenous peoples harnessed solar energy to preserve their harvests. This simple yet brilliant technique worked anywhere the sun shone, though tribes across different environments developed unique approaches to maximize efficiency. Have you ever noticed how quickly food dries on a hot, sunny day? Tribes certainly did. The Hopi of the American Southwest perfected elevated drying structures called kivas, where corn would be spread across rooftops, simultaneously drying in the desert sun, while being watched over by community members going about daily activities. Pacific Northwest tribes constructed elaborate wooden drying racks for salmon, positioned to catch prevailing winds that accelerated the process. Meanwhile, Kalahari Bushmen sliced game meat into thin strips called biltong, hanging them on bushes where intense heat quickly created protein-rich travel rations. But sun-drying came with challenges, mainly uninvited dinner guests. To protect their drying bounty from insects, birds, and other hungry visitors, tribes developed ingenious solutions. Some, like certain Amazonian groups, covered drying racks with finely woven screens that allowed airflow while keeping insects out. Others, like the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, used smoke from smouldering fires beneath drying platforms to repel flying insects. Knowing exactly when food was properly dried required generations of knowledge. Too little drying invited mold. Too much created brittle, unappetizing provisions. The Pueblo peoples tested corn kernels with their teeth. Properly dried corn would resist biting pressure but not shatter. Andean cultures pinched drying potatoes, looking for the perfect balance of firmness and slight give that indicated ideal moisture levels. Once dried, foods were stored in specialized containers, clay vessels, tightly woven baskets lined with leaves, or wrapped packages sealed with animal fat. When needed, these foods were reconstituted by soaking in water or adding directly to stews. What might surprise you is that sun-drying actually concentrated certain nutrients. Dried berries contained more antioxidants per ounce, while dried meat provided concentrated protein that sustained hunters on long expeditions. But when clouds rolled in and rain threatened the drying process, tribes turned to their cooking fires for more than just warmth. Smoke became their invisible preservation shield. Smoke, that invisible cloud of compounds rising from the fire, became one of humanity's most effective preservation shields long before refrigeration existed. Tribes discovered that this byproduct of their cooking fires could transform perishable foods into lasting provisions, creating an antimicrobial barrier while imparting distinctive flavors. Have you ever noticed how different woods create different aromas when burned? Indigenous peoples certainly did, selecting specific woods for their unique preservation properties. Northwest Coast tribes, like the Haida and Tlingit, preferred alderwood when smoking salmon, finding it created the perfect balance of flavor and preservation power. Inland tribes often chose fruit woods like cherry or apple for smoking game meats, while cedar and pine were typically avoided as they left bitter, sometimes toxic residues. Each wood type released specific compounds that deterred bacteria and fungi while creating signature tastes that identified foods with specific communities. The smoking structures themselves reflected local climate challenges and tribal ingenuity. Cold smoking, the slow process using smoke without much heat, dominated in northern regions where the Ainu of Japan built elaborate smokehouses with multiple chambers, allowing different foods to receive varying smoke intensities. Plains tribes constructed simple but effective smoke frames from bent saplings that could be quickly assembled during hunts, then disassembled for travel. The most sophisticated systems, like those of Pacific Northwest peoples, featured adjustable vents that controlled airflow, smoke density, and temperature with remarkable precision. Smoking rarely worked alone. It partnered with other preservation methods. Many tribes first sun-dried foods partially, then finished with smoking, creating provisions with extended shelf life. Others combined smoking with later storage in animal fat or plant oils, producing emergency rations that could last for years. The science behind smoke preservation involves compounds like formaldehyde and phenols that create an antimicrobial environment while slowly dehydrating the food. Beyond preservation, these smoking processes often became ceremonial community events where knowledge transferred between generations. The Karuk tribe of California held elaborate ceremonies before salmon smoking, believing proper respect ensured future abundant harvests. Perhaps most surprising, certain smoking woods like juniper and mesquite were selected specifically for their medicinal properties, with tribes like the Navajo using smoke-preserved foods to treat winter respiratory ailments. Though smoke worked wonders for meat and fish, tribes living near oceans and salt deposits had access to an even more powerful preservation agent, one so valuable it created trade routes spanning hundreds of miles. Salt became one of history's most precious commodities, with some tribes travelling hundreds of miles to acquire this preservation miracle. Coastal peoples from Africa to the Americas created evaporation pools where seawater left behind crystalline treasures as the sun did its work. Inland tribes discovered natural salt springs, mineral deposits, or developed ingenious methods of extracting salt from salt-rich plants by burning them and collecting the mineral-laden ash. Did you know that certain tribes in the Amazon burned specific palms, collecting the resulting ash as a salt substitute that was traded extensively throughout the rainforest? The trading routes for salt created complex networks of tribal relations. In North America, the Salado people of the Southwest controlled major salt deposits, trading their mineral wealth for pottery, textiles, and other essentials with neighbouring tribes. Some Pueblo communities made regular pilgrimages to sacred salt collection sites, where gathering this life-sustaining mineral became both practical necessity and spiritual ritual. Tribes developed diverse preservation techniques using their precious salt. Some, like certain Plains tribes, created dry salt rubs for meat, drawing out moisture while infusing tissues with preservative minerals. Others, particularly coastal peoples, used brine solutions to cure fish and shellfish. The most effective long-term storage involved heavy salt packing, with foods completely buried in salt crystals inside watertight containers made from animal bladders or sealed pottery. Salt's preservation power comes from its ability to create an inhospitable environment for bacteria. When salt contacts food, it draws water out through osmosis, dehydrating both the food and any microorganisms. Without sufficient moisture, bacteria and fungi cannot grow or reproduce, effectively halting spoilage. Each tribe developed specialized recipes using their salt-preserved foods. Alaskan tribes created saltfish preparations that could sustain them through harsh winters. In the American Great Basin, salt-preserved venison became the protein base for pemmican, mixed with dried berries and fat, for complete nutrition in a compact, long-lasting form. What many people don't realize is how tribes handled the extreme saltiness before eating these preserved foods. Many employed soaking rituals, carefully rinsing salt-preserved items in fresh water before cooking. Others incorporated salt-preserved items as small flavor enhancers in stews, where their salinity would distribute throughout the meal. But for tribes without access to salt deposits, the preservation answer often came through a process of controlled decomposition, using good bacteria to fight the bad. Across the globe, tribes independently discovered a preservation paradox. They could save food from spoiling by deliberately allowing it to decompose in a controlled way. This microbial miracle happened when tribes created environments where beneficial bacteria thrived while harmful ones couldn't survive. Have you ever tasted foods like yogurt, sauerkraut, or kimchi? These modern ferments descend directly from preservation techniques perfected by Indigenous peoples thousands of years ago. The magic started with carefully cultivated starter cultures. Hawaiian communities passed down poi starters made from previous fermentations, each family maintaining their distinct bacterial blend that created signature flavors. Tibetan nomads preserved milk cultures in dried form, carrying their microbial helpers as they migrated with their herds. These starters weren't random. They represented generations of selection for both safety and taste. Fermentation vessels evolved to perfectly control the process. Some tribes, like those in Central Africa, used clay pots with specific porosity that allowed precise gas exchange. Mongolian and Siberian peoples preferred skin bags that expanded as fermentation gases developed. In Southeast Asia, leaf wrappings created the perfect humid environment for rice fermentation, while South Pacific Islanders often used earth pits lined with leaves for fermenting breadfruit and taro. Perhaps most impressive was how tribes learned to harness fermentation not just for preservation, but for safety and nutrition. Amazonian peoples discovered that fermenting bitter manioc broke down its natural cyanide compounds, transforming a potentially deadly root into a safe staple. Arctic peoples created fermented fish pastes rich in umami flavors and preserved nutrients that sustained them through harsh winters. The nutrition benefits of fermentation would impress modern dietitians. Native Alaskans fermenting seal oil created a product richer in fat-soluble vitamins than the fresh version. Korean kimchi predecessors, fermented vegetables developed by tribal ancestors, increased vitamin content while creating protective probiotics. In the Pacific, poi fermentation made taro's nutrients more bioavailable, providing sustained energy from this complex food. Timing was everything. Tribes learned precise fermentation periods for different foods. Too brief, and preservation benefits were minimal. Too long, and foods developed unpleasant flavours or textures. This precision developed through careful observation and community knowledge transmitted across generations. While fermentation worked for many foods, tribes in regions with cold winters or high altitudes had another option: turning the earth itself into a natural refrigerator. Beneath the soil's surface lies nature's original refrigerator, a world of consistent temperatures that tribes worldwide discovered could preserve their precious food stores. Just a few feet underground, the earth maintains remarkably stable conditions, regardless of whether the surface broils under summer sun or freezes in winter's grip. Did you know that at about 6 feet deep, soil temperature stays nearly constant year-round, hovering around 55 degrees, 13 degrees, in most temperate regions? Plains tribes like the Mandan and Hidatsa constructed elaborate underground caches, digging bell-shaped pits that expanded below a narrow entrance, making them easier to seal and harder for animals to access. These ingenious structures stored dried corn, beans, and preserved bison meat for months without spoilage. Arctic peoples took this concept further, excavating chambers directly into permafrost, where temperatures remained below freezing year-round, creating natural deep freezers for meat and fish. Even desert tribes utilized underground storage despite their hot environments. The Tohono O'odham dug deep pits reaching cooler soil layers, where they stored seeds, dried fruits, and cactus products. These desert caches could maintain temperatures 20 to 30 degrees cooler than the scorching surface above. The materials lining these underground storehouses proved just as important as their location. Many tribes use specific clay mixtures with natural antimicrobial properties to coat storage pit walls. Others lined pits with carefully selected plant materials. The Ojibwe used birch bark layers, which contain natural compounds that repel insects and inhibit mold growth. In Alaska, whalebone and blubber lined ice cellars, providing structural support while adding additional insulation. Protecting against moisture represented the greatest challenge. Clever drainage systems featured gravel layers beneath storage areas, while prairie tribes installed sumps at pit bottoms to collect condensation. To deter rodents and insects, many groups incorporated natural repellents. Juniper boughs, certain mineral clays, and ash layers created barriers unwelcome to pests. Not all foods thrived underground. Root vegetables, nuts, seeds, and dried goods fared best, while meat required additional preservation steps before underground storage. Timing mattered too. Most underground caches were opened only during specific seasons to maintain their preservative environment. Underground storage worked wonderfully for whole foods, but for liquid foods and stews, tribes turned to something else entirely: the remarkable preservation properties of clay and pottery. Long before Tupperware or glass containers, clay pottery served as nature's perfect food storage system, regulating both moisture and temperature through its semi-porous structure. Unlike airtight modern containers, traditional clay vessels breathed, allowing minimal air exchange that prevented condensation while maintaining humidity at ideal levels for many foods. Have you ever noticed how a clay pot keeps water cooler than plastic containers? This same property helped preserve tribal food stores, with specially shaped vessels maintaining temperatures several degrees below ambient conditions. What's truly remarkable is how certain tribes discovered clays with natural preservation properties. Pueblo peoples of the American Southwest selected specific clay deposits containing trace minerals that naturally inhibited bacterial growth. Amazonian tribes along the Rio Negro used clay rich in aluminum compounds that preserved fish and game for weeks longer than ordinary vessels. These special clays weren't just containers, they actively participated in the preservation process. Sealing these vessels required ingenious solutions. Ancestral Puebloans applied pine pitch seals to storage jars, the resin creating an airtight barrier while adding antimicrobial properties. Mesoamerican tribes used beeswax mixed with plant oils to seal their vessels, while Arctic peoples applied rendered animal fats that hardened to form tight seals. The Hopi created fitted stone lids for their larger storage jars, using cornmeal paste as a temporary gasket. The location of these pottery storage vessels proved just as important as their construction. Underground rooms with specific humidity levels preserved beans and corn in Anasazi pottery for years without spoilage. Some tribes buried sealed pots up to their necks in cool soil, creating micro-environments perfect for preserving fermented foods and medicines. Pottery design evolved specifically to enhance preservation. Narrow-necked vessels minimized air exposure, while allowing gases from fermentation to escape slowly. Some clever designs included interior ridges that caught mold spores before they could reach the main food chamber, while others featured multiple chambers that separated ingredients until use. Archaeological evidence confirms how effective these methods were. Perfectly preserved seeds have been found in 1,000-year-old Pueblo storage jars, still viable and able to germinate. Analysis of residue from ancient Chinese and Egyptian vessels shows that honey, grain, and even wine remained preserved for centuries. When pottery alone wasn't enough to keep foods fresh in hot climates, tribes discovered another powerful preservation method: submersion in oils rendered from animals and plants. Submerging foods in oils created the ultimate preservation shield, a liquid barrier that completely blocked oxygen from reaching the food inside. This simple but brilliant technique worked because harmful bacteria that cause spoilage need oxygen to survive, and when completely surrounded by oil, food remained protected for months or even years. Have you ever wondered why oil and water don't mix? This same property made oils perfect preservation mediums, creating impenetrable barriers that locked freshness inside while keeping spoilage out. Different preservation needs called for different oils. Animal fats like seal, whale, and bear provided solid, stable preservation mediums in colder climates. The Inuit of Alaska preserved salmon berries and blueberries in seal oil, creating nutrient-dense winter foods that prevented scurvy. Southwestern tribes rendered bear fat to preserve chilies, herbs, and even certain meats, finding it imparted a rich flavor while protecting against the dry desert heat. In warmer regions, plant oils dominated. Mediterranean cultures used olive oil to preserve everything from fish to cheese and vegetables. North African tribes preserved fruits and herbs in palm oil, while East Asian communities used rendered rice bran oil for preserving bamboo shoots and fish. The rendering process itself became a specialized skill. Arctic peoples slowly melted animal fats at precise temperatures that prevented scorching while removing impurities. Tribes in warmer climates developed clarification methods, using everything from eggshells to special filtering clays that removed particles that might otherwise cause rancidity. Storage containers for oil-preserved foods required special attention. Watertight baskets coated with pitch, specially sealed pottery, and animal bladders all served as vessels. Some of the most ingenious containers came from the Pacific Northwest, where bent wood boxes with precise corner joints held oil-preserved foods without leaking. The nutritional benefits of oil preservation proved particularly valuable. Foods preserved this way retained more calories and nutrients than dried equivalents, making them perfect emergency rations. Arctic hunters carried oil-preserved fish as their survival food, knowing its high energy content could sustain them through blizzards or hunting mishaps. While oils worked wonders for some foods, tribes with access to natural sweeteners discovered that honey and plant sugars offered another powerful way to keep foods edible, for months or even years. Nature's sweetest substances, honey and plant sugars, offered tribes powerful preservation tools with near-magical properties. Honey, in particular, possesses extraordinary antimicrobial capabilities that modern science has only recently begun to understand. Did you know that archaeologists have found 3,000-year-old honey in Egyptian tombs that remained perfectly edible? Indigenous peoples discovered honey's preservation power thousands of years before laboratory analysis revealed its perfect preservation, pH, enzyme activity, and hydrogen peroxide production. Wild honey gathering became specialized knowledge, often surrounded by ritual and ceremony. African Hadza hunter-gatherers developed a remarkable partnership with honey guide birds, following their distinctive calls to hidden beehives. North American tribes use smoke to calm bees before harvesting, while indigenous minds practice sophisticated bee husbandry, keeping stingless bees in log hives specifically for preservation honey. When honey wasn't available, tribes extracted concentrated sugars from plants. The Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, tapped maple trees, boiling the sap into shelf-stable sugar used to preserve berries and certain meats. Andean peoples extracted sugars from yacon roots, while Mesoamerican groups developed techniques to concentrate agave sap into preservation-grade sweeteners. The preservation process typically involved completely submerging foods in honey or creating concentrated sugar solutions. Berries, fruits, nuts, and even certain meats could be preserved this way. What's fascinating is how these sweet preserves often became more than just food. They transformed into medicines and ceremonial substances. The Zulu created honey-preserved herbs for treating respiratory ailments, while Australian Aboriginal peoples preserved certain medicinal flowers in wild honey. Some of the most innovative sweet preservation techniques emerged in unexpected places. Ethiopian tribes created honey wine, chai, that not only preserved honey, but became a preservation medium itself for herbs and fruits. Native Americans in the Northeast mixed maple sugar with dried berries and rendered fat to create pemmican variants that would remain edible for years. South American groups discovered that certain fruits preserved in sugarcane juice developed enhanced flavor profiles while remaining viable food sources through lean seasons. Beyond preservation, these sweet mediums added precious calories to indigenous diets, providing energy-dense nutrition when hunting or gathering couldn't meet daily needs. But for tribes living in the world's most frigid regions, nature provided a different preservation solution: the remarkable ability to use extreme cold to lock in freshness. Cold environments offered indigenous peoples nature's perfect freezer, preserving their harvests without any technology beyond careful knowledge of their frigid surroundings. Across the Arctic, Siberian and high mountain regions, tribes perfected preservation techniques that harnessed winter's freeze, sometimes creating foods that could last for years. Have you ever noticed how freezing changes food's texture? Indigenous peoples understood these changes intimately, using them to their advantage. In the far north, Inuit communities constructed elaborate ice cellars called sikluak, dug deep into permafrost where temperatures remained below freezing year-round. These underground freezers stored whale meat, seal blubber, and fish in carefully arranged layers, providing food security through the darkest winter months. Some traditional ice cellars contained food reserves sufficient to sustain extended families for an entire year. High in the Andes, Quechua and Aymara peoples developed perhaps the most sophisticated freeze-dried foods anywhere. Their technique for creating chuño involved exposing potatoes to freezing nights and intense daytime sun, then physically stomping out moisture. This cycle, repeated for 5 to 7 days, produced shelf-stable potatoes that remained edible for decades and could be reconstituted into nutritious meals. Surprisingly, some cold climate preservation techniques deliberately used multiple freeze-thaw cycles. Siberian Yakut people prepared stroganina by allowing fish to freeze-thaw repeatedly in specific patterns, changing the cellular structure in ways that preserved nutrients while creating a uniquely palatable texture. Arctic communities aged certain meats through controlled freezing, producing delicacies like iguanak, fermented walrus or seal that developed complex flavors through partial freezing. The nutritional profile of freeze-preserved foods far surpassed other preservation methods. Unlike drying or smoking, freezing retained nearly all original nutrients, particularly vital in environments where fresh plant foods were seasonally unavailable. The frozen meat caches of Arctic peoples provided essential vitamin C, normally associated with plant foods, through raw frozen preparations that prevented scurvy. Storage vessels evolved specifically for frozen foods. Alaskan peoples used moss-insulated ice pits, while Siberian tribes constructed ice block structures above ground, insulated with animal hides that maintained freezing temperatures even as spring approached. Moving from the coldest environments to some of the hottest, tribes in tropical and desert regions perfected a preservation technique that turned the earth into both oven and refrigerator, pit cooking and storage. In the blistering heat of tropical islands and sun-scorched deserts, tribes turned to the earth itself as both cooking vessel and preservation chamber. These ingenious pit methods simultaneously cooked food while changing its chemistry for long-term storage, a process that modern food scientists might call thermal processing. Have you ever noticed how baking bread extends its shelf life compared to raw dough? Indigenous peoples discovered this principle thousands of years ago, developing earth pit technologies that transformed perishable foods into stable provisions. The construction of these pits varied by environment and purpose. Hawaiian Aimu pits featured precisely arranged volcanic rocks that retained heat for days, while Australian Aboriginal earth ovens used layers of hot coals, moistened grasses, and sand to create steamy enclosed environments. Desert-dwelling peoples often dug deeper pits that accessed soil with specific mineral compositions that enhanced preservation. What made these pits truly effective was their ability to slow cook foods while triggering chemical changes that extended shelf life. Starchy foods like taro, yams, and agave underwent prolonged heating that converted complex carbohydrates into simpler sugars with natural preservative properties. The extended cooking process killed bacteria while creating slightly acidic conditions inhospitable to new microbial growth. The layering techniques within these pits represented generations of refined knowledge. Polynesian breadfruit pits use specific leaf types that release natural antimicrobial compounds during heating. Southwestern tribes incorporated ash layers with high alkaline content that preserved seed and grain breads for months. Some of the most complex systems came from Pacific Islands, where fermentation pits for breadfruit contained up to 7 distinct layers, each serving a specific preservation purpose. Many tribes distinguished between cooking preservation pits and storage-only pits. The Pueblo peoples created special pit structures solely for storing previously cooked foods, with ventilation channels that maintained ideal humidity while preventing moisture accumulation. Pacific Islanders developed fermentation pits specifically for transforming breadfruit into a paste that remained edible for years. Valuable insurance against crop failures or natural disasters. Perhaps most surprising was how these pit methods enhanced nutrition. Certain vitamins became more bioavailable through the slow cooking process, while problematic compounds in foods like cassava were neutralized. While proper storage extended food life, the most successful tribal preservation often began long before storage, with the careful timing of harvesting and gathering. Long before printed calendars or smartphone reminders, tribal communities developed sophisticated timing systems for harvesting that dramatically improved food preservation success. The moment of harvest itself became the first critical step in preservation, with tribes recognizing that foods collected at precise times contained natural chemistry that extended storage life. Have you ever noticed how some fruits picked too early never properly ripen, while those harvested too late spoil quickly? Indigenous peoples map these optimal windows with remarkable precision. These harvest calendars emerge from countless generations of careful observation. Pueblo farmers knew that corn harvested after the first light frost, but before the deep freeze, contained lower moisture content, making it resistant to storage molds. Wild rice gatherers in the Great Lakes region identified a specific 10-day window when the grains reached perfect maturity for long-term storage. Aboriginal Australians recognise specific phases of certain tubers that maximise their underground storage potential. Many tribes relied on lunar cycles to guide harvest timing. The full moon before the autumn equinox signalled ideal berry collecting time for numerous northwest coast tribes, while Mesoamerican communities harvested preservation-bound chiles during the waning moon, believing they contained less moisture during this phase. These weren't mere superstitions. Modern research has confirmed that certain plants indeed contain different moisture levels corresponding to lunar phases. Beyond the sky, tribes read subtle environmental cues. When goldenrod bloomed in the northeast, it was time to harvest preservation-grade beans. When certain migratory birds appeared in the southwest, pine nuts had reached optimal harvest maturity. The Lakota observed bison building winter fat reserves as the signal to begin their own preservation activities. These precisely timed harvests became important cultural moments wrapped in ceremony and community coordination. The Hopi conducted specific rituals to honour corn destined for long-term storage, while Pacific Northwest potlatches often coincided with preservation-focused salmon runs. These ceremonies served practical purposes, organising large workforces needed for time-sensitive preservation activities. The most successful preservation operations involved entire communities working in coordinated systems. Among many tribes, elders who could no longer participate in physically demanding hunts became preservation specialists, directing younger members in perfect harvest timing based on astronomical knowledge and environmental patterns passed through generations. After timing the perfect harvest, many tribes turned to another abundant resource to keep food fresh: the life-giving properties of flowing water and springs. Water, life's most essential element, served Indigenous peoples as nature's refrigerator long before electricity existed. Cold springs and flowing streams maintained temperatures well below ambient air, creating perfect preservation environments that tribes worldwide incorporated into sophisticated food storage systems. Have you ever dipped your hand into a natural spring and felt its surprising cold even on hot days? This consistent coolness, typically maintaining 50 to 58 degrees, 10 to 14 degrees year-round, became the foundation for numerous tribal preservation techniques. Eastern woodland tribes constructed spring houses, small structures built directly over cold springs, where meat, fresh milk, and foraged foods remained cool for days or weeks, longer than ambient storage allowed. The Cherokee built stone-lined chambers with precisely directed water flow that created cooling currents while preventing food from becoming waterlogged. Some preservation methods took the concept further, with direct water immersion for specific foods. Pacific Northwest tribes developed stream coolers for salmon, partially submerged baskets positioned in fast-flowing water that kept fresh catch cool while awaiting processing. The constantly moving water prevented bacterial growth while maintaining ideal temperatures. Perhaps most surprising were underwater storage techniques developed by desert peoples who faced extreme preservation challenges. Tribes in the American Southwest sealed special waterproof baskets and pottery containing mesquite beans and preserved seeds, then submerged them in deep desert springs where cool temperatures and darkness extended viability for months. Archaeological evidence from the Owens Valley reveals submerged storage chambers that maintain temperatures 20 to 30 degrees cooler than the scorching desert above. Combining water preservation with other methods created remarkably effective systems. Northwestern tribes first smoked salmon, then stored it in water-cooled cedar boxes for an additional preservation boost. Certain Amazonian communities fermented manioc, then submerged the resulting paste in clay vessels placed in cool streams, creating food reserves that lasted through unpredictable, dry seasons. These water systems required special protection against contamination and water damage. Many tribes incorporated natural antimicrobial elements. Certain tribes added specific mineral stones to spring houses that inhibited bacterial growth, while others directed water flow through charcoal beds that naturally filtered impurities. Special drainage systems prevented waterlogging, while elevated platforms kept food suspended above direct water contact. While some tribes stored food close to the ground, others looked upward, using the natural ventilation and protection of trees to create nature's perfect pantry. Looking upward into the forest canopy, Indigenous peoples discovered the perfect preservation solution: aerial storage systems that protected precious food stores from ground-dwelling threats. These elevated designs used height and airflow to create secure food caches that remained accessible to humans while staying out of reach from hungry animals. Ever wondered why traditional granaries around the world stand on stilts? This concept originated with tribal aerial storage systems that provided multiple preservation advantages. Elevated storage offered immediate protection against the trifecta of ground-level threats: rodents, insects, and seasonal flooding. Amazon rainforest tribes constructed elaborate platform systems 15 to 20 feet above ground, connected by removable ladders that effectively isolated their preserved manioc flour and smoked meats from both crawling pests and rising floodwaters. Plains tribes built specialized scaffolds called cache tripods, 3 sturdy poles lashed together and topped with a platform that kept pemmican and dried buffalo meat safe during seasonal migrations. The ingenuity extended to designs that maximized air circulation for different climate challenges. In humid environments like the Pacific Northwest, storage platforms featured slatted floors and open sides that promoted constant airflow around hanging salmon, preventing mold while continuing the drying process. Arctic peoples constructed raised caches with adjustable ventilation panels that could be opened in dry weather and sealed during storms. Protective coverings evolved to address regional threats. In bird-rich environments, tribes developed tightly woven canopies that prevented aerial raiders from accessing stored foods. The Seminole of Florida created distinctive thatch coverings for their elevated granaries that repelled both rain and climbing animals, while allowing sufficient air exchange to prevent moisture buildup. Among the most impressive examples were the Alaska native bentwood storage boxes, mounted high on community totem poles. These precisely crafted containers incorporated natural cedar oils that repelled insects, while the elevation kept contents safe from wolves and bears. Some containers featured carved ridges and overhangs specifically designed to prevent climbing animals from gaining purchase. The most sophisticated aerial systems incorporated deterrents that worked on multiple levels. Smooth poles greased with animal fat prevented rodents from climbing, while strategic placement of thorny branches discouraged larger predators. Some Amazon tribes positioned their platforms near stinging insect nests that served as natural security systems. For the final touch of food security, tribes turned to some of nature's most powerful antimicrobial substances: the remarkable preservation properties of ash and spices. The remarkable preservative powers of ash and spices provided Indigenous peoples with chemical allies in their ongoing battle against food spoilage. These natural substances contained compounds that inhibited microbial growth, transformed food chemistry, and extended shelf life long before modern preservatives existed. Have you ever noticed how spicy foods seem to stay fresh longer than bland ones? Tribes worldwide discovered this phenomenon thousands of years ago, developing sophisticated preservation systems based on these powerful natural ingredients. Wood ashes weren't just cooking fire remnants, they contained different alkaline compounds depending on the trees burned. Mesoamerican peoples discovered that treating corn with ash created a process called nixtamalization, which not only preserved the grain, but dramatically improved its nutritional profile by liberating bound niacin. This transformed corn from a simple carbohydrate into a complete protein source capable of sustaining entire civilizations. The Maya and Aztec specifically selected hardwood ashes with higher calcium hydroxide content that maximize both preservation and nutrition. Across the Americas, specific ash types developed for different preservation needs. Juniper ash, rich in calcium and antimicrobial compounds, became prized by Southwest tribes for preserving berries and meats. Northwest Coast peoples used alder ash mixed with salt to create fish preservation pastes that could last through multiple seasons. The antimicrobial properties of spices created parallel preservation traditions. South American tribes incorporated chili peppers into almost everything they preserved, using capsaicin's powerful antimicrobial properties to extend food life. Amazonian communities developed complex spice blends, mixing hot peppers with local herbs specifically for preserving fish and game in the challenging rainforest environment. Combining ash and spice preservation with other methods created remarkably effective systems. North African tribes preserved dates in clay pots lined with specific ash types and layered with cardamom and cinnamon. Indigenous Mexicans wrapped ash-treated corn in specific leaves containing additional antimicrobial compounds. These preservation techniques offered unexpected health benefits beyond basic nutrition. Many spices used for preservation, turmeric, cloves, cinnamon, and chile peppers, contain powerful antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds. Archaeological evidence suggests lower rates of certain diseases in populations, relying on spice-preserved foods. Perhaps most fascinating was how these preservation needs sparked extensive trade networks. Chili peppers travelled trade routes from their South American origin to become essential preservation tools throughout the Americas. Juniper berries moved along complex indigenous trading paths specifically for their preservation properties, connecting distant communities through the shared knowledge of keeping food fresh.